There is an image of Dubai that most people carry in their heads. Glass towers catching the sun at impossible angles. An island shaped like a palm tree visible from space. A ski slope operating inside a mall in a country that receives almost no rain. That image is real. Those things exist. But there is another image of Dubai that almost nobody is showing you. And it does not appear in any tourism brochure, any investment prospectus, or any promotional reel produced by the Emirates marketing machine. It is the image of sand. Quiet, patient, moving sand, filling the gaps between towers that some property observers say were supposed to be full of residents and never quite got there. Covering the edges of districts that were master planned with roads and utilities and then stalled before enough people moved in. According to certain long-term analysts of Gulf real estate, the boundary between what was built and what was never quite finished is quietly blurring in ways that the official numbers do not fully capture. That is what we are examining today on Strategic Dynamics Edge. And by the end of this video, the Dubai story is going to look very different from the one you have been told. Before we go any further, if you want analysis that goes past the headline and into the structure underneath it, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. This community exists for people who want to understand how things actually work, not just how they are presented. Share this video with someone who thinks they already know the Dubai story. And leave a comment below telling me what surprises you most by the end. Something will. Let us get into it. A quick and important note before we continue. Everything in this video draws on publicly available reporting, commentary from property analysts, structural engineering perspectives that have appeared in credible industry discussions, and observable urban trends in Gulf development. Where specific claims are made about particular developments or districts, these reflect the accounts of analysts and long-term observers rather than independently verified official data. This is analytical commentary and perspective, not financial advice, not real estate advice, and not a prediction of any specific outcome. With that clearly established, let us start where this story actually begins. To understand what some analysts argue is happening to Dubai today, you have to understand the foundational decision that was made at the very start. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Dubai made a choice that almost no city in recorded history had made before it. It decided to build not for the population it had, but for the population it intended to attract. This is a critical distinction. Most cities grow because people are already there and need places to live and work. Dubai worked in reverse. It built the places first and then attempted to manufacture demand through spectacle. The Burj Al Arab, according to this reading of events, was not constructed because Dubai had an overflow of luxury tourists needing accommodation. It was constructed to create the idea that Dubai was the kind of place luxury tourists should want to visit. The Palm Jumeirah was not built to solve a housing shortage. It was built to generate a visual signal powerful enough to travel around the world and make people ask, what kind of city does something like that? The entire emirate was, at its core, a marketing campaign rendered in steel and glass and concrete. And for a specific window of time, roughly 2003 to 2008, and then again from around 2012 to 2019, that strategy worked with a consistency that genuinely stunned urban economists and development experts worldwide. The spectacle attracted the money. The money built more spectacle. International investors arrived. Expatriates chased tax-free salaries. Tourists checked off bucket list items. Corporations planted regional headquarters in a city that felt like it operated outside the normal rules of geography and economic gravity. Dubai became one of the most photographed skylines on Earth. For a city of its actual size, that is not an accident. It is the result of a deliberate and extraordinarily expensive strategy. But here is the vulnerability that critics argue strategies built primarily on spectacle carry, that strategies built on organic fundamentals do not. They require the spectacle to keep escalating. The moment the show stops getting bigger, some observers argue the audience begins to drift. And around 2019, before the pandemic arrived, certain analysts were already flagging that the escalation was showing signs of strain. Property observers noted that residential vacancies in several major districts were drifting upward, not collapsing dramatically, but rising in the way that analysts tend to flag internally without it making headlines because slow drift is not photogenic. Rental prices in areas outside the premium zones had been softening for an extended period according to some market tracking reports. The population growth that had been projected to justify the volume of residential units being built was, according to certain analysts, not arriving on schedule. These were not catastrophic numbers in isolation. Critics describe them as structural signals, the kind of data that suggests the underlying model was beginning to stress in ways the surface performance was not yet reflecting. Then the pandemic arrived, and what had been a slow drift became something significantly faster. The expatriate movement out of Dubai during COVID-19 was not unique to the emirate, but various analysts have argued it hit Dubai harder than many comparable cities for a reason specific to how the city was structured. Dubai's population is overwhelmingly non-citizen. Estimates frequently cited in Gulf demographic reporting place the proportion of foreign nationals among Dubai's residents at somewhere between 88 and 92%. When the economic conditions that had brought those people to Dubai contracted, the jobs, the salaries, the business opportunities, critics argue there was insufficient cultural and social gravity to retain them at scale. Many left, and the apartments they had been renting did not fill back up as quickly as some optimistic projections had suggested they would. Population contraction estimates from 2020 and 2021 varied depending on methodology, but certain credible analyses pointed to meaningful reductions in Dubai's resident base during the peak disruption period. In a city where physical infrastructure had been built for a population trajectory pointing consistently upward, property observers noted significant effects on occupancy rates in mid-range and outer district developments. Some analysts described towers that had been running at moderate occupancy levels, dropping to figures that in other urban contexts would be described as functionally distressed. And this is where, according to certain property and engineering observers, the sand stops being purely metaphorical and becomes a physical consideration. The specific geography of Dubai means that the relationship between building maintenance and desert conditions is not a forgiving one. In the areas where Dubai's expansion pushed furthest into undeveloped desert, districts that were master-planned with road networks and utility infrastructure, and then stalled at various stages of residential completion. Some long-term observers describe a process of gradual physical encroachment, not dramatic, not cinematic, but incremental in the way that sand actually moves, filling gaps between structures, covering surfaces that are no longer being actively maintained, blurring the edges between what was completed and what was never quite finished. There is a stretch of development that people who follow Dubai's property market closely refer to informally as the Ghost Corridor. This is not an official designation. It is a term that reportedly began circulating among expatriate investor communities, tracking slower-moving stories that major financial press outlets were not prioritizing. It is described by those who use the term as a zone of residential towers completed in the early 2010s, sold to international investors on payment plans, and then left in a state of legal and logistical uncertainty when the rental demand that was supposed to make the investment mathematics work failed to fully materialize. The buildings, as described by observers of this area, are not abandoned in any dramatic sense. They are occupied at low rates. But the spaces between them, unfinished retail components at ground level, landscaping that was planned but not installed, access infrastructure that was begun but not completed. Those spaces are, according to people who have visited and documented them, gradually being filled by the surrounding desert environment. Multiple property analysts, structural engineering commentators, and long-term Gulf residents have described in publicly available discussions a pattern across outer development zones that they argue is consistent enough to represent a trend rather than isolated incidents. Where residential density falls below a threshold that makes active maintenance economically viable, and where that happens in proximity to undeveloped desert land, critics argue the physical encroachment of the natural environment into built areas accelerates in ways the original development projections did not adequately account for. Now, at this point, the counter-narrative deserves genuine space because it is not without substance. Investment in Dubai's premium segments is real and strong. New visa categories are attracting a different profile of resident. The luxury end of the market has been performing in ways that are documented and significant. High net worth individuals from multiple source markets have been moving into the top end of Dubai's property market in volumes that keep aggregate figures looking impressive. And the government has demonstrated a repeated ability to intervene in ways that have prevented the most pessimistic scenarios from completing. But here is where critics argue, you need to read the data carefully. When analysts report that Dubai real estate is performing strongly, they are often describing the top 15 to 20% of the market. The premium waterfront towers, the developments in proximity to zones that still carry the aspirational signal of early Dubai. What those reports tend not to emphasize, according to some property observers, is what is happening in mid-market and outer district segments, which represent a much larger share of the actual physical city. Those segments are, by various accounts, not recovering at a pace that matches the physical aging of the buildings within them. The gap between premium performance and mid-market reality is, critics argue, widening rather than closing. And underneath all of this sits what some urban analysts describe as a structural feedback loop specific to Dubai's infrastructure dependency. The city desalinates essentially all of its fresh water. That process is energy-intensive, cost-intensive, and dependent on a continuous base of fee-paying residents and businesses to fund the infrastructure that delivers it. When occupancy rates drop in a given district, the per-unit cost of maintaining water and utility infrastructure rises. When costs rise, management companies reduce maintenance spending. When maintenance spending drops, physical quality declines faster. When physical quality declines, the district becomes less attractive to prospective residents. When it becomes less attractive, occupancy drops further. Urban planners have a term for this dynamic. They call it a doom loop. Critics have pointed to examples of this pattern in post-industrial Western cities, though it is important to note that Dubai's situation differs significantly in its triggers and in the government's capacity and demonstrated willingness to intervene. That willingness to intervene is the strongest argument on the other side of this analysis. Dubai recovered from the 2009 debt crisis when many observers had written it off. It navigated the 2015 to 2016 property correction. It hosted Expo 2020 and generated genuine momentum from the experience. The Golden Visa, the Retirement Visa, the Freelancer Visa represent genuine structural attempts to diversify the residential base toward longer-term commitment. These are not trivial interventions. They have produced measurable effects, particularly at the premium end of the market. What critics argue, however, is that these interventions address symptoms rather than the underlying structural condition. The city was built at a speed and at a scale that outran the organic human demand that could have supported it sustainably over the long term. Visa categories can encourage people to stay longer. What they cannot manufacture, some observers contend, is the cultural and social gravity that makes people want to remain in a place, regardless of whether the economic conditions are ideal in any given period. That gravity, historically, takes generations to develop. Dubai in its current recognizable form is barely 50 years old. What it has instead, according to this analytical reading, is a race. A race between two forces moving simultaneously and in opposite directions. On one side, the ongoing effort to attract committed long-term residents and diversify the economic base away from pure short-term expatriate dependency. On the other side, the physical reality of buildings aging faster than their maintenance structures can manage in some outer districts, and a desert environment that, as certain observers note, operates on timescales that human development cycles cannot easily match. The towers at the edges of Dubai's furthest expansion zones were built on assumptions of continuous forward momentum. The assumption that the city would keep arriving to fill the space before the space began pushing back. Some of those towers, according to observers of these outer districts, are still waiting, and the desert, as it always has, is simply continuing to do what deserts do. If you visit certain parts of Dubai's outer development zones on a quiet afternoon, with the wind moving the way it always has and the sun doing what it does in this part of the world, the skyline behind you looks exactly as it does in the photographs. Remarkable, ambitious, a genuine achievement by any objective measure. And the ground in front of you, according to people who have stood in those spaces and documented what they saw, tells a different story. The kind of story that does not appear in the brochure. The kind that some analysts argue is already being written slowly, consistently, and without any particular urgency because sand has never needed urgency. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think happens next. Does Dubai close the gap between its premium skyline story and its mid-market reality in time, or does the structural pressure accumulate faster than the interventions can manage? I read every comment on this channel, and this community's perspective genuinely shapes what we cover. Share this video with someone who follows global economics or urban development. Hit the like button if this kind of structural analysis is what you come here for. And if you are not yet subscribed to Strategic Dynamics Edge, this is the moment. We track the stories that the architects and the marketing campaigns are not paid to tell you. See you in the next one. This video is produced for informational and educational purposes only. All content reflects analytical commentary and perspective drawn from publicly available reporting and industry observation. Specific claims about developments, occupancy figures, and urban trends represent the views of analysts and observers rather than verified official data. Strategic Dynamics Edge does not provide financial, investment, or real estate advice. Viewers are encouraged to consult qualified professionals and primary sources independently before drawing conclusions from analytical content of this kind.